Good morning. It's a beautiful day here up in Show Low, Arizona, and welcome back to Gardening 101. This is part 3, planning your garden. And like in real estate, it's location, location, location. I'm Kris Coates, and I'm a certified arborist, certified desert landscaper, and a master gardener. In the first 2 parts, you recall in Garden 101, we discussed our soil and what it was, how to make it better, and we touched a little bit, just a tiny bit, on plant nutrition. Today we're going to look at locating your garden, beginning with our Arizona climate and ending with some various garden plants and things like that. So let's go ahead and get started. We got lots of things to do today. Before we get fully into this, I want to show you commandments for the new gardener. These are also good for old gardeners. And the very biggest thing about your garden commandments is don't plan too big. Start small. You'll be more successful, and go from there. Don't overestimate how much time you have to garden, because gardening does take time. Whether you're doing vegetables or flowers, it takes time. Don't assume you're going to know it all right off the bat. I've been gardening for well over 50 years, and I still learn things, and I think that's really neat, because that's part of the fun of gardening, is there's always something new to learn. Don't plant things that you should eat. Plant things that you like to eat. There's no sense planting things if they're just going to rot in the garden and you're not going to eat them. So remember these 6 commandments for the new gardener, or the older gardener, and keep those in mind whenever you're gardening. Okay. Where are we in Arizona? Well, Arizona is divided into what we call 3 physiographic provinces: the Colorado Plateau, the Transition Zone, and the Basin and Range, which is basically the low desert. You can see here where some cities are that will help you locate us. You can see the big red dot for Show Low. We're kind of almost on the transition zone and the border of the Colorado Plateau. We're probably a little more into the transition zone, but my dot had to be big enough to show up, so it's a little bit big here. You can see some of the other cities around for reference, so that you can see exactly where we are. When you look at plants in a nursery or in seed packets, you're going to see something that says climate growing zone on them. And that's very important. There are a range of zones that will be listed on any plant label or seed packet label. So what does that really mean for us? Well, basically there are 2 commonly used climate zone maps. The most common one is USDA Plant Hardiness Zone. This is also an older one. It was developed back in 1960. It's had a couple of revisions since then, which is good, because we have newer techniques for measuring climate and temperature and things like that, and also newer technical tools. But this map basically gives you the average, and I'll emphasize average, minimum annual temperature in winter. So it basically tells you your lowest temperature that you usually get in an area. Now, excuse me, this version that you're looking at here is the newest version, which is the 2012 version. Now, here's a little bit of a close-up of where we would be in that, and you'll see the red circle down in the lower left here, and it shows that we are in zone 6B, B as in boy. This is important for us because It doesn't really tell you how well your plant will do, but it will tell you how well your plant will survive, or whether it will or will not survive. So we are in planting zone, climate zone C6B, and that's very important. Now this varies a little bit, whether you're on a hilltop or down in a valley. And the USD map really does a pretty good job of showing garden climates, especially on the eastern half of the United States. However, we are in the western half of the United States. There are many factors besides winter lows that are important in determining how well your plants survive and hopefully thrive. So we'll go to the next one. This is the sunset climate zone map. It's not as frequently used on those plant labels and things like that, but it is a very important one. Actually, the sunset climate zone map considers a lot more than just average minimum lows. It considers several different things like latitude, the latitude that you might be in the United States. It considers things like elevation, and it considers ocean influence. Now, especially on the coast, we have a lot of ocean influence from the air and things coming in. As that air passes through the coast ranges and the Sierras, it loses some of that humidity. But even so, we get a lot of that humidity. In the middle of the country, it tends to be very dry because the middle of the country is so big, it really kind of creates its own weather. And so the East Coast, of course, has a marine influence, an ocean influence from the Atlantic Ocean. But we're interested in ocean influence from the Pacific. And what I just talked about, that continental air influence, that's in the middle of the country. Also, it takes into account whether you're on a mountain or in a valley or somewhere in between. This is important because your weather changes. The higher up you go, of course, the cooler it gets. We know that here in the White Mountains. But there are also other influences. You can be cooler on the top of a mountain and warmer down in a valley, right within the same zone. Microclimates are extremely important. These are considered on the sunset climate zone map, but they're also important for your individual house. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those later on. Here's a little close-up of the sunset zone map. And on the sunset zone map, we're in climate zone 2B, as in boy. You can see the red dot on the right side of the screen, or the red circle, which would be approximately where Show Low is. This is an interesting slide I put together. Now, all of these cities are in growing zone 6B, or 2B, depending on which map you're looking at. And yet, look at the difference, particularly in the amounts of rain and snow in the middle of the screen there. This shows you the variation, even though it's the same climate zone, that can occur within a climate zone. The growing days even are somewhat different, and the earliest blooms. Pinetop Lakeside is certainly the coldest area. Snowflake and Taylor get a little lower in elevation, and so they're a little warmer. But definitely, this is just an example of how much things can change even within one zone. Now, we did mention microclimates, and these are very important. They can be things like buildings, your house, a building, an office, anything like that. It can be trees or tall shrubs. These can create a block for wind, which of course is going to then warm up the area. Hillsides, again, we talked about being on the top of the hill or the bottom of the hill. Sometimes the middle of the hill is the best place to be because you get the best of both worlds. And we talked about being down in valleys, especially where you're looking at frost. Cold air falls. Where does it go? In the valley. And directions. Are your plants on the north side of the house, the south side of the house, the east or west side? Things like that. These all make your microclimates. Now, sun and shade angles are very important. Why? Because if you have a plant that likes a lot of sun and you put it on the side of the house where it doesn't get very much sun, that plant is not going to be happy. It's not going to produce fruit. It might get very tall and leggy and basically kind of ugly looking. So it's important to know where the sun hits on your property. And if you're growing vegetable plants in particular, most of them, there are some exceptions, but most of them prefer full sun, which is considered 6 hours of steady sun during the day or more. So now for these sun angles, you can see how the sun on the screen changes from winter to summer. And if you've looked around your yard at all, you know that the sun moves quite a bit between those 2 days. This will help you, but by knowing this about your house, it will help you to visualize where your sunny or warm areas are, where your shady and cool areas are. As an example, normally you would think that the east side of the house, or the west side of the house would be fairly warm. Well, at my house, that's the coldest place there is. So I planted some trees in there that I wanted to encourage to bloom later so that they would not be hit by our late frosts. So if you know where your sun and shade are, you can do things like that. And it's not always very apparent. Okay. At the bottom left of your screen, you'll see a internet address, www.suncalc.org. This is a great website. It's free. And you can go into that and put in your address and get your sun angles. You can sit out in the yard all day and put little flags in the ground and measure the sun as it moves. Personally, I find this website to be totally wonderful. Here's an example of my house on November 27th last year. And I put my address in, and you can see on the screen there on the right, the nearest the center area, and then out to the bottom where it says noon, you can see that is the range of sun that will hit my house between winter and summer. Now the noon with the dot, that's actually the winter area, and you might not be able to see it, but it's a tiny bit heavier yellow line. So by being able to use something like this, it's going to save you a lot of time. This site is wonderful. If you're a star watcher or something, it'll tell you when all the eclipses are expected and give you time and date and everything. Go on that website and explore it. It's very, very interesting, and I know you're going to have you're going to learn a lot of things from it. Okay, so another part of planning our garden, once we know what our climate is and where our sun or shade is in our house, what do you like to eat? What flowers do you like? What colors of flowers do you like? These are all things that you need to excuse me, to determine. Climate, we've talked about. Climate is long-term. Weather is what's happening right now today. It's sunny, so we're having good weather today. And we talked about soil and building the ecosystem last time around. So these are all parts of planning your garden. Now, a lot of people like to make little sketches, and your garden plan can be just as simple and sketchy as you like, or it can be very detailed and right to scale. In fact, you can even determine what plants you want where if you want. Not everybody wants to be quite this detailed, and you don't have to be. It's up to you. Whatever works for you, but make some type of a plan so that you know it, at the minimum, sunny and shady parts and things like that. How do you want to build your garden? Well, you can do in-ground gardens. Those are always popular. There are raised bed gardens and there are container gardens. So your in-ground garden, this is probably the most work because you're going to have to dig a little bit of that ground, especially if it's a new garden, a first-year garden. But it's generally the cheapest too. So, and you know, it's traditional. Some people prefer to do it, some people don't. And again, that's your choice. You would begin this by removing any weeds. We talked last time about soil testing, and it's always a good idea to do a soil test just to see what is there or not there in your garden. You probably, for a new garden, are going to have to do some tilling or double digging, even though you're destroying some of your soil food web. But once you do it for that first year and you add some amendments in that we talked about last time, then you'll be ready to, each year, you'll just put some amendments on the top and not dig it all up. Okay, so that's in-ground gardens. In-ground gardens don't have to be straight rows. They don't have to be ugly. You can go ahead and make it like one of these examples here. If you're out in the country and you have chickens, chickens can be very useful in a garden. But even like at the lower left of the screen, you can have a garden in your front yard if you like. You can put some little edging around it. This on the right side here, they used some old bricks. You could use rocks and things like that just to kind of define the garden beds and maybe add a little artistry to it. Raised beds, oh my heavens. Lots of people like raised beds and they can be very useful. It doesn't matter, you can make them out of the cement blocks as in the left top of the screen here. You can use wood as in the center, and on the bottom right of the screen we have them up on legs. So they're a raised bed that is up high enough for people in wheelchairs or who otherwise cannot bend or don't want to bend. Those beds are very handy like that. If you have a slope, the beds are also very handy on slopes because you in essence terrace the item. And of course you can put seats and benches around the beds and make them very comfortable and decorative. Now once the bed is formed, you fill it with soil. That doesn't mean you go out into the yard and you dig a bunch of soil up. It means you probably go to a materials seller to buy some type of composted soil or raised bed soil, they sometimes call it. You can go down to one of the big box stores and you can definitely buy bags. Unless you're doing maybe just one small raised bed, that's probably the most expensive way to go. So generally, you want to get this in bulk by the pickup truck load if you're doing a raised bed garden. Raised bed gardens have a couple of advantages over in soil. There's pretty much no weeds. That makes a lot of people happy. Also, they tend to warm up earlier in the spring, so you can therefore plant earlier. But they are a little bit more expensive. Now here's some more examples of raised bed down at the bottom of the screen. You might be able to see that they have put hardware cloth at the bottom of this raised bed. And if you have gopher problems and things like that, if you put hardware cloth at the bottom of that raised bed, they won't come through that. They might want to and they might try, but they won't get through it. Also, you will see square foot gardening. There's been square foot gardening books for years and years and years, probably 20 years by this time. And a lot of people like that. It's a very intensive way to garden. You put your plants much closer together than you would ordinarily. And you can do square foot gardening in ground or in raised beds, either one. But you can see in the left side of the screen towards the top, they've actually made a little pattern of squares to follow as they plant their vegetables or flowers, whatever it might be in it. And on the bottom right of the screen, we're going to talk a little bit more about lasagna gardening. You can see in this raised bed, there is cardboard in the bottom of it, a fairly thick area of cardboard, several layers. And lasagna gardening is very, very popular nowadays. Other types of raised gardens, again, they don't have to be straight lines or anything. You can see there are several examples here, and you can do just about anything with a raised bed that you would like. Make it decorative, make it utilitarian, whatever you like. Now, containers, this group of containers almost verge on raised beds. They're almost kind of like a hybrid. So these are containers, but again, you can see that there are some, the one in the bottom center, a person that doesn't want to bend or is in a wheelchair would be able to use that container very nicely. Containers do have some of the similar advantages of raised bed gardening. Very few or no weeds. And they do tend to warm up quicker in the spring. Of course, they also cool off quicker in the winter and the fall. Here are some more different types of containers. Really, container gardening is only limited by your imagination. If you want to use baskets, like in the bottom center of the screen, baskets make great containers. They don't last much more than a season, maybe 2 seasons, but they look very pretty and they make good containers. If you live in an apartment, the bottom right, hey, fill that balcony with all types of flowers. Again, you would see your sun angles and how much sun you're getting on your balcony, and you would put plants in that would fit that sun. But there are all kinds of creative ways to use container gardening. I like the one in the center here. Those are old drain pipes from somebody took the drains off their, the guttering off their house. And you'll notice in the picture, they're slanted. So you put water in at one end, it runs down, drops to the next gutter, runs down, and so on down the line. I thought that was really quite creative. So, and here's some more creative things to do. The picture on the right, I would only put those jars on a shady wall, otherwise you're going to cook the roots of your plants. But again, containers are only limited by your imagination. And yes, some people are ghoulishly creative. Although upon thinking of it, if I was in one of these graves, I'd kind of enjoy having somebody plant flowers over me. And when you're doing your garden, whether it's in the ground or in containers, don't forget your vertical space. You can do a lot of things with vertical space. Cucumbers can grow on it, melons can grow on it, keeps those items out of the dirt, away from some of the insects, and it makes more space, quite frankly. And your vertical space can also be something fun for the kids. You can make them a bean teepee or anything like that. On the far left, you can spile your fruit trees on a wall of some type. That will give you the chance to have a lot more fruit tree space. If your yard will not carry the size of a fruit tree. And we can talk about fruit trees later. And then there are always those very extreme gardeners who never have enough space. I think the guy on the left has used about every inch that he could possibly use. Okay, that's the end of part 3. Now we're going to go to Gardening 101 Part 4, and we're going to continue talking about planning your garden. We're going to take a close look at lasagna gardening and whether to choose seeds or transplants, and where to find some of those seeds and transplants. And then we'll finish with just a bit about companion planting. So thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.